Hello and welcome to a bonus episode of the Ray Show podcast. I'm your host, Johnny Ray, and I'm sitting here with Jack Slayton.
Hello.
How are you, sir?
Doing good.
Good deal, man. Tonight, we are lucky enough to have Mr. Martin Popoff on the show. We're going to talk about the recent passing of Mr. Edward Van Halen, who, to me, Jesus Christ, I can't name, a figure probably more recognizable from the 80s in my youth than Eddie Van Halen. And that whole first Van Halen album, that is youth personified. And it sounds like it was fucking made 2 weeks from now by aliens that crash land on the earth, and it's from 1978. But me and Jack had a chat with Mr. Martin Popoff early in the morning. We had a couple of shots of whiskey. I had been working all night, and it was we were going to do the interview the next day, but let's just say we were in fond remembrance, and
Things got a little out of hand.
nothing gets out of hand. But I want to thank Martin so much for coming on and being a part of this. And here's our mini tribute episode to Mr. Edward Van Halen. May he rest in power. Johnny Ray with the Ray Show podcast. I'm here with my co-host, Jack Slayton. And we are fortunate enough to have music journalist and rock and roll historian, Mr. Martin Popoff, with us today. He is also the author of Unchained, a Van Halen User's Manual. And as you can tell today, our episode's going to be a special episode all about Mr. Edward Van Halen. But first off, how you doing, Martin?
Not too bad. Book sales are pretty good, so doing a lot of book stuff, and I'm writing away and doing a lot of social media, and I've got my own podcast, History in 5 Songs with Martin Popoff, and I did an Eddie episode for that as well, and it's been busy with the whole Eddie thing, but no, I would say my work life is pretty much the same as it's always been.
Right. And I'd like to give your podcast a shout out right now. It's such a great wealth of information, and everybody needs to check it out. But, you were one of the first people I thought about, when we got the news of, Eddie passing away on Tuesday after a courageous battle with cancer. There's not many families that cancer has not touched their lives. So I think people obviously saw the dignity with which he fought this disease. And somehow how it was just straight up kind of kept out of the news. Other than kind of what Roth would say. How do you think he kept this a secret so many years?
Well, I mean, he seemed like something that us as the fans thought, felt pretty good about, that he was going to beat this, because it seemed kind of localized. It was lip cancer, and then, obviously it progressed, and I guess the official thing is, throat cancer.
Right.
But, I mean, there were announcements that he was entering some sort of, hospital situation. I think it was in Texas. That he had been doing this, and then he was out, and then the doctors would give him the all clear. So, I mean, you're right. There has been a dignity about the whole thing along the way, but there's also been a little bit of sharing of information, which is, quite frankly, in the Van Halen camp, any information is good information, because they are a little bit of a secretive band. They always kind of have been.
Yeah. And I cannot remember, maybe Bowie. Eddie just seems like a real iconic figure from a certain generation that is just really hitting people hard on just so many levels. When do you first remember Van Halen, hearing Van Halen, or them coming into your life?
Well, definitely right when the first record came out in 1978. And I don't know if, I was 15 at the time, but me and my buddies, had already somehow heard about the hype about this band. So when we got that record, I distinctly remember, because we had already been more or less hard rock super fans, experts for 2 or 3 years by that point. But still, I do somewhat, for some reason, remember that we knew kind of all about this band as we were dropping the needle on this record for the first time. And then when we heard it, I mean, yeah, completely blown away. It's got some of the heaviest metal songs you had ever heard up to that point. A few that were a little dated sounding, and it had a cover and it had a guitar solo. So it was a little, I honestly remember thinking this is a really amazing record. It's really, really cool, but maybe not my favorite record of all time because, a few things on it. I remember not being a huge fan of Jamie's Crying and Running with the Devil and Feel Your Love Tonight or whatever it's called, and a few things like that, right? Ice Cream Man. Um, but the heaviest songs were, it's almost like one of these bands that basically said, right, we don't consider ourselves a heavy metal band, but if you want some heavy metal, here's the absolute gold standard of it. So you got, On Fire and Ain't Talking About Love and what's the other one? Atomic Punk, right?
I'm the One. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's those four basically, right?
Right.
So yeah, an amazing record, and obviously it was a huge hit right out of the gate. I haven't quite looked up to recall for myself, but I think it probably was gold already by the time the second one came out, if not already platinum by the time the second one came out. And the second one was, the next year, probably within a year or so, because the first one was February '78, right?
Right. And I remember at that time you had Kiss putting three records out a year around around that time. But with that album, I hear what you're saying, and to me it's the sound of youth almost personified. I mean, it just sounds like Friday night. And it still keeps that freshness. I told somebody the other day that it just sounds like it was made, 10 days from now by aliens that landed on the earth, which brings me to my next thing I wanted to talk to you about. You draw a lot of parallels between Hendrix and Eddie. I think you've mentioned that you feel that Eddie was the first guitar hero after Hendrix, correct?
Yeah, I totally believe that. I mean, there are all these guys along the way who are sort of part guitar hero, part just kind of like a good band member and a songwriter and all that. So you do have your Jimmy Pages and your Ritchie Blackmores and Michael Schenkers, but Hendrix was, just to use your, what you just said, Johnny, like this whole idea of like descended from Mars. Jimmy was like this guy that was way different than your Eric Claptons and Jeff Becks and Jimmy Pages at the time, right? So he's the first guitar hero. I don't think there really is a guitar hero that you could talk about in the same way until Eddie comes along and names a song Eruption and brings tapping, out of the occasional bits of tapping we heard here and there. In my Van Halen book Unchained, I think there's a whole chapter on tapping, and I get ticked off when I give the short story and people say Eddie didn't invent tapping. It's like, well, I know, like there's these 10 other examples of it more or less along the way, but Eddie essentially, made it one of the major tools in his toolbox, and it's probably the number one thing he's known of for his sound. So Eddie comes along, huge guitar hero. Everybody sees him that way, but also he causes the whole idea of the guitar hero to be something that lasts for a good 10 years. Every hair band has to have a great guitarist. There are guitar instructional videos that'll come out. There's guitar albums. You get the likes of a career of Joe Satriani and Steve Vai and all the guys that came up with Eddie. You've got Carlos Cavazo and Randy Rhoads and Warren DeMartini, George Lynch, Jakey Lee. So all these guys come up at the same time, but Eddie's the first to hit it and hit it big because basically they put out like 5 albums before these guys ever even have their first album, right?
Right.
So Van, he's miles ahead of everybody else that way too. And I would argue that when I go down the list in my head of great guitarists, he's probably the guy with probably the most signature sound of any guitarist I can think of. Yeah, so Eddie Van Halen, the big thing is that he came up with all these guys in California. George Lynch and Warren DeMartini and Jakey Lee, Carlos Cavazo, Randy Rhoads, but he was so far ahead of them because he had like 5 records out before any of them had records out. You know, essentially the big record boom starts 1983, 1984. But, you know, I mean, basically Van Halen kickstarted the whole massive industry that was hair metal all the way up through 1991. And B, he really shifted the fulcrum of the music industry back to California for all of those years as well. I mean, bands, you know, good musicians from all over America would move to California at this point, right?
Right.
To do this. And I know it's always been a tradition, but it was a huge thing. So basically, all attention is certainly in the hard rock world was all focused on essentially California at the time. So that's a big deal. And yeah, he caused the idea of Guitar Heroes to come up, caused the idea of shredding, caused an industry in instructional videos, an industry in guitar-only albums, you know, careers of the likes of Steve Vai and Joe Satriani. So that's why I would say, you know, certainly he's the most inspiring guitar hero ever since Jimi Hendrix.
Right, and it's interesting you bring up, you know, California, because he was a California guy. They were a California band, and you've got to put them up there with the great L.A. rock bands of all time. I mean, they were from Pasadena, but you've got to really give them that California kind of stamp, as important as any of the others. But I'd like to talk about Wolfgang now. And I think it's one of the most interesting stories ever when Van Halen reformed, and he had, I believe Wolfgang was 15 on that first tour.
Okay, not sure. But
15 or 16. I thought it was a really interesting, beautiful choice. You know, this guy wants to be around his son so much. He wants to play music with him. How do you think that all went down? And do you think there was a lot of resistance to it initially in the camp?
Yeah, I thought it was a beautiful thing too. I mean, I don't like the messiness of having just one guy not being, you know, the classic lineup or whatever, right? So, you know, it would have been nice to have Michael Anthony in there, but you know, in retrospect, it's really cool that Wolfgang was so good so early. I mean, the guy's a virtuoso, right? And you know, I got asked this question the other day. You know, how will they continue on and stuff? And I'm almost thinking that it's more like, you know, Alex, I maybe he may not come back to music or be part of whatever he's doing with Wolfgang or the Van Halen brand. I think it's probably Wolfgang that will carry it forward, because he seems to be a great guy and a really good musician, and obviously, you know, plays with all these different situations. I think he's the guy that's going to carry forward the Van Halen brand. So it was kind of cool that way, to see that. And yeah, it was great to see Eddie, you know, bonding with family like that as well. But yeah, of course, you know, it would have been nice to have all 4 members in place just for the neatness of it, right?
Right, exactly. And you're absolutely right. He's a virtuoso. I mean, I was listening to some of the bass lines on a different kind of truth, and like She's the Woman. It's just amazing. And I think it's so fitting for him to carry on this legacy. Where do you put, you know, the surviving members? You've already kind of mentioned Alex, but taking David Lee Roth, Sammy Hagar, and Michael Anthony into consideration, do you see those guys coming together to celebrate Eddie's life and music?
Boy, you know, number one, Sammy and Mikey basically have a pretty thriving situation, right? Whether it's Chickenfoot or Mikey with Sammy and the Wabaritas or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And they're buddies, and they continue on. You know, we got to remember that both of these lead vocalists are probably somewheres around 70, for argument's sake, right?
Yeah.
And you know, and I used to keep saying over and over, wow, Sammy's like hasn't lost a beat, he's perfect and stuff. But I have seen some live stuff lately where his voice is finally starting to show a little bit of wear and tear and age. And Dave has been kind of in that camp for quite a while. Dave's a funny one, man. I listen to what he does, and it's almost like, I was having this conversation with someone the other day that basically it almost seems like all he has to do is try a little harder, and he would absolutely be twice as good as he's coming off as, right?
Oh,
And
absolutely.
he'll hit the notes and pay attention and do the lyrics and all that stuff and just kind of, tone down the dance moves a little or whatever, like rein it in a little, but also at the same time just really kind of strive and put in a little more effort on the vocals. And I think he would be much better than he is. He still might not be great, but it just seems like it's not completely not up to him to be better.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, it's not that his voice is completely crap and he can't hit anything and he's not going to hit it no matter how he tries. It just seems weirdly that all he has to do is try a little harder, and he would be quite acceptable out there.
Oh yeah.
So it's really odd, but obviously it's not going to last forever, right? But and again, he's been surprising all of us with going out with that that new band, just young faceless guys. But yeah, I would love to see him with a bunch of superstars, right, in front of a much better band, or back in front of Steve Vai and Billy Sheehan or something like that, and Greg Bissonette or whatever, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So yeah, I mean, I could see those guys continuing on, but the vocal cords is the weak link in this whole thing. It doesn't last forever. So, but yeah, I mean, Eddie and Alex have both been to some extent, not nearly as much as Brian May, but they've been to some extent a little bit of wasted talents, in that you would have wanted more output out of them over the years. There's quite a bit of output, but you would have wanted more. And Alex is just one of my favorite drummers of all time. I would love to hear more Alex. So I would love to see that guy join a great band of legends as big as he is. That would be amazing to see Alex on 3 or 4 more studio albums.
Oh gosh, yes. Well, let's get into just a few things in the few minutes we have left. What do you think is the best post Roth offering as an album as a whole?
Okay. So I would say hands down it would be For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge, because to me that's the Try Harder album. I did an episode of my History in 5 Songs on Go to Vancouver and Try Harder albums, right? And if I remember correctly, that's got a little bit of Vancouver mixed in with it, but it's not really a Vancouver album. But I don't know. I may be wrong in that. I may be mixing that up with Balance a little bit as well. But anyways, that record, for sure, what I do know about that record is it's the heaviest of all of them. It's the most fatly produced of all of them. It's probably the longest of all of them, and it's the one with the least fat. It doesn't have all the little, instrumental segments in that. So to me, it truly is the Try Harder one of all of those. It's the one probably with the better lyrics. It just seemed like everybody was putting in the most effort on that one, above the likes of, we got 5150, OU 812, Balance. They're all short records. Maybe Balance isn't that short, but it's got a lot of fat on it, and Sammy complains about it for that reason. And it's just not as good. It's not as good as FUCK. And that's all of them, right? Yeah. Right. So they made like 4 albums. So yeah, that one just has always stood way apart, like almost like a different situation. Those other 3 to me are very similar to each other.
Right. Well, what rarities would you suggest that are out there floating around in YouTube that would really songs people might not have heard, in your opinion, that would be worth checking out?
Boy, so not quite so rare, but I've always loved Up for Breakfast, which I even featured on my Eddie episode that I just turned in yesterday. So that's like a non-LP, but it's on a one of the greatest hits things, best of or whatever, stupid best of volume 1 or whatever it's called, or best of both worlds. So there's Up for Breakfast and the other one that came out exactly the same time, and then there's Meme-Wise Magic and Can't Get That Stuff No More, which are the David Lee Roth ones. There are a few rarities. There's some B-side stuff. There's a really good Sammy B-side that's kind of like a dark ballady epic thing, and I can't remember the name of it, but that's a pretty cool tune. Is it Flying High or something like that? I've got it on a CD single. And I remember they covered Apolitical Blues by Little Feat, I think it is.
Oh yeah.
That's kind of a toss away. But other than that, I don't know what other rarities are there. I mean, there's all the demo versions of everything they put on A Different Kind of Truth with altered lyrics and stuff like that. I can't think of what else there is, but I'll tell you, with a lot of these bands, if you went on YouTube and you searched rarities like crazy, it's amazing the things you will find. I did that for Aerosmith one day, and there were it seemed like there were dozens of songs to listen to, right?
Oh,
So
yeah.
I'm not sure what else Van Halen has.
Well, one thing, everybody knows how Eddie will be remembered. He's definitely going to go down as just an icon and of the guitar. But how will you best remember him? Be it through a live show or an interaction you had with him? How would you best remember him?
That smile, in the videos, like he's like that band, like they were the great California party band, and it looked like they were having fun on stage. He just kind of exuded just great, pleasurable showmanship. That's one thing. Also, I think this idea that he really did have a super distinct sound. The tapping, I'll always think of the tapping, whether it's long passages or short things that linked to other things all over the place. The creative fearlessness of all of those records. I've often argued that this is a band. I did an episode. I didn't include Van Halen in this, but I did an episode of History in 5 Songs called "Bands of Individuals." And Van Halen is sort of like that. You hear you hear a distinct thing out of all the people in the bands. So it comes together, but it still looks like a bunch of parts. And Van Halen has always struck me that way. So yeah, that's kind of it. Just all those great songs, and played all those records to death, every single one of them, all the Sammy ones as well. But yeah, I just probably if I was to really nail it down, I would say the guitarist with the most self-identifying, unique sound of all time.
Yeah, I could not disagree with that. Well, Martin, thank you so much for taking your time out to talk to us. The book is Unchained and Van Halen User's Manual, and everybody should go and grab that immediately. And listen to Martin's podcast as well. Martin, you got any plugs?
The other thing, Johnny, just to interject, I mean, the other thing that's happening is about a month and a half from now, I'm going to have a big Van Halen coffee book out called coffee table book called Van Halen: A Visual Biography. It's the same as the Blue Oyster Cult one that I have out.
Oh yeah! Oh my God!
So I'll be getting those from the UK from my publisher that I did this for. So basically, it's a big long timeline, an expanded timeline over and above what was in Unchained, a Van Halen user manual. But then it's basically just 200 something yummy, big thick pages, full color throughout, of all the memorabilia and live shots and all that sort of stuff. So that'll be at martinpopoff.com, and there's going to be PayPal buttons and everything for that. I do have the Unchained book still in print, so that's still available right now as well.
Well, that coffee table book is, I'm way looking forward to that. And I'm looking forward to everything else you're working on too. And we will talk to you very soon, sir.
Awesome. Thanks for having me again.
Thank you. I want to thank Martin for taking his time out to share his memories of one of the great musical badasses of all time, Mr. Eddie Van Halen. And we had a few half shots that morning, so we were kind of in the spirit of the Van Halen vibe. Wouldn't you say so, Jack?
Oh, we had a good time. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's our mini episode for this week. Be looking for more of these in the future, and make sure to follow us on Instagram at Ratio Podcast. So stay switched on, and we'll talk to you soon.